Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. If you're new here, my name is Christina. If you're not new here, hi, welcome back. It's good to see you. This is a reading for Capricorn rising, or if you have significant Capricorn placements in your chart and are needing a neutral energy to work with or balance within yourself, which is very appropriate for this reading today. So we're gonna get started. I feel like this usually happens whenever I do like all the same element signs in one week, right? So today Capricorn, you're sort of the third earth sign that I've done this week, and it kind of feels like it doesn't have to be, but it kind of feels like it's almost like a continuation of that story. So if you haven't watched the Taurus and Virgo readings, they might provide some insight into like where it is that you've led up to, but it doesn't have to be. So I'm gonna try and do this reading without necessarily referencing those, but it may be helpful for you as well. So I'll just leave that there. But we're starting off here. The overall context of the reading, we have the Iron card, which I really love because this talks about like reliability, right? I feel like that's a very Capricornian kind of energy for me, right? Like very steady, very reliable, something that you can depend on. And I feel like that's sort of the overall context. I feel like you've been doing something very like steadily or putting a lot of work in. It talks about strength. It talks about building as well. So I feel like this has to do with something that you've been building for a really long time, very reliably, right? With a lot of strength is kind of how this is feeling. And then you have here these beautiful combination of cards. The rotation card, which talks about the Wheel of Fortune, right? Things are changing. Something is shifting from this reliable state is kind of how this is feeling. Something that's been very steady is now shifting. And then you have here the Great Serpent, which is also sort of a Wheel of Fortune kind of completion or shifting. It kind of specifically also talks about like transmutation. So I feel like something that perhaps you've been actively working towards, or perhaps trying to like heal, or if not heal, like, because you do have shadows here coming out, shadows in the blade, which is really interesting. So this talks to me about like healing or something that takes a lot of, again, responsibility or care. I was watching something this morning, just like a random video that showed up on my feed that was like sharpening a knife, right? Which is absolutely necessary. And I feel like you Capricorn, with all of this strength, especially with iron, it's coming in with like almost like blacksmith type work, right? Like you've been building or working towards something that takes a lot of care and precision, right? Like sharpening a knife, but that takes also a lot of skill, right? And responsibility. That's what this is talking about. And then finally you have you have this Autumn card, which is talking about the culmination, right? The harvest, collecting the bounty. It's all of this abundance energy. That's what I feel like this reading is about. Like you've reached some sort of very significant culmination point, and it's like what's shifting is going from the iron energy, which is more of like a Mars energy, like your strength, your action, your direction forward, into this copper, which is much softer. It's associated with Venus, so it's like pleasure and happiness and like very like almost like sensual kind of energy here, which is really interesting because I feel like it's a very, and you have Venus here, which I forgot to mention, right? It's a very different energy, but one that feels very welcome. It's almost like this is the reward for all the hard work that you've been putting in for however long you've been engaged in this sort of transmutation process, is kind of how this is feeling. You reach the culmination of something really significant and things are about to shift for you. Okay, so that's the overall context of the reading. We're gonna go into the current energy, which I really love because you have here the great work, which also came out yesterday, right? If you watched the Virgo reading, I'll link it above. But that reading was all focused on, it's so interesting, the element silver, right? Like being second. But today I was very much focused on the yellow rose in the center. And then just to emphasize that these two cards came out to support that, right? The yellowing, right? Emphasizing some sort of significant transition. That's what this yellowing card it's coming through with almost like maturity, or like, especially with the autumn, right? This sort of like culmination, the great work. Of course, the great work is not ever complete, right? It's always continual. But it's emphasizing this idea of like devotion and attention, something that you've been doing like one day at a time. It's like some sort of journey that you've been taking one day at a time. So that could have to do with like, I'm just going to leave it because I feel like you'll know what this is. Something that you've been building or building towards perhaps over a long period of time. And it's like finally something is shifting. So with these two cards here, it's especially with the golden rose, right? The golden rose, which is that thing at the center. It's a really lovely energy because it kind of feels like it's all of the culmination, right? Like this is the goal of the alchemical process. That's kind of what this thing talks about. This is the whole reason why you've been engaged on this journey, is kind of what this is feeling like. And it finally bloomed, right? Like there's been something finally achieved about this process for you, Capricorn. And what I love about this one, there was a line in the guidebook that said like surrendering to the altar of the unknown. It's like, I feel like there's or like a secret, honoring the secret, right? That's honoring the secret. There's some sort of secret that you've now learned, is kind of how this is feeling. And instead of sort of like speaking it or sharing it or like shouting it from the rooftops, it's more just like you're holding it within yourself, right? It's this kind of like just honoring it. Understanding that there's so much unknown about the process perhaps, or whatever. It's like it's just a complete surrender, which I absolutely love, this yellowing card. Okay, and it's also coming out with the dice and the Jupiter, which I really love, because both of these cards talk about luck and chance, which is really interesting. But because we're talking about like a day by day, like one day at a time kind of thing, it was bringing in this idea of probability. And like, if you're familiar with like probability, like the Gaussian curve, right? The bell curve, where if you do something enough times, right? If you roll a dice enough times, like more than just like a handful, right? You have to do it. It's a culmination. You have to take a whole bunch of samples, is kind of what this is talking about. Over time, over a long period of time with a big sample size, eventually you get a curve of probability that is very reliable, if that makes sense. So even though it's something that's like chance, right? You throw a pair of dice and see like what the outcome is. But if you record that process, right? You roll dice once every single day for like the culmination of your life, there's a very reliable pattern that emerges. And I feel like that's the secret, Capricorn, for you, where you've understood or discovered some sort of like secret pattern or secret like reliability or reliable pattern that you can depend on, even though other people would consider that as being lucky, right? It's like you stumbled upon something like this, right? That's what they would say. They would be like, you stumbled upon some sort of secret. But for you, Capricorn, it's like, it's not luck. It's not luck. It's reliability. That's what this is talking about with the Jupiter. right? It's not something that, well, maybe there is some aspect of that, right? It kind of feels like perhaps there may be some perhaps new inspiration, but it kind of feels like with these three cards, that's so interesting because you have all of this like, the yellow obviously is a huge theme for you, right? The yellowing with the sun and the Hanged Man. So if you just focus on these two things first, the sun and the Hanged Man, which I love together. These, like, this Hanged Man card is probably one of my favorite cards in this deck. But it's talking about, like, again with the sun, right? It's something that you have devoted time to, perhaps every day, right? Like something that is very reliable, like the sun always rises, or if it's not a sunny day, you at least know that there's a new day, right? Like that kind of thing. And with the Hanged Man as well, it's kind of like this like new perspective, but I feel like it's kind of like this is the eureka moment, right? It's like every day you show up to whatever it is that you've been trying to accomplish, and it's like this is the moment where you get that eureka inspiration kind of thing, right? But what's on the other side, like, because it's coming through a lot with this balance. So if for this card here next, the Androgen, which I really love, because it's talking about like a balance, right? A very significant integration and balance, that if you have like the sun, you also need the moon. If you have a masculine energy, you also need the feminine energy. And it's a coexisting, but also there's also a blue flower here, right? So there's something here because you have that golden flower in the middle. You have this blue flower as well. So it's like perhaps there's three different aspects in your life, right? Or just like it could be like a lot of different aspects of your life, right? Are all coming together in full bloom in this sort of harvest, collecting the bounty moment all at once is kind of how this is feeling, right? Like all three of these projects, because again, here with this other deck that I'm using, you have this pink flower as well, right? So there's three, perhaps three is a very significant number for you right now, but there's three aspects of your life, right? Like three facets, three opportunities, maybe three projects that you've been showing up every day to work on, and all three of them are blooming at once is kind of how this is feeling. Okay, anyways, okay, there's this one line from this deck. I closed the book, so hold on. I want to find it because I want to read it as it is in the book. Give me 1 second. X. Okay, so it says, for one brief moment, we hold all of our complexities in one loving form. So like a newborn, we know not our name, gender, age, or location. We are the embodied artist, embraced unconditionally by the sun and the moon. So I feel like there's something here for you, Capricorn, where it's like with sort of like that yellow and blue energy here, because those are opposite colors, right? There's something here about, I feel like you've understood something about bringing together opposite, perhaps, aspects of yourself, or just like understanding sort of like if there's sun, if there's light, there's also shadow, right? That kind of thing. So apply that how to your life, however it resonates for you. But I feel like because of that, with this spider here as well, right? Because in yesterday's Virgo reading, the insects was an interesting thing. I feel like there's something here that has to do with like with shadow and things that are uncomfortable. It's like because you were willing to look at something that was uncomfortable, right? With this, like, so it could be like an aspect of your shadow, right? Or like I'm just going to leave it like that. Perhaps an aspect of your shadow or something that was opposite or difficult or whatever it is, because you were willing to look at that or engage with that, it's causing the rotation, right? The Wheel of Fortune moment, the new inspiration perhaps to come in. And what I love about this energy here is like you have the Page of Inspiration, which I always talk about as sort of like having that, like, because, well, it talks to me about creativity specifically. So it kind of feels like perhaps creating things, right? But sometimes the thing about creativity, I feel like most people think about creativity as being sort of like you get a flash of inspiration, right? You get a flash of inspiration and all of a sudden you just start like painting or writing or whatever it is that your specific art form or expression is, right? I feel like most people think of creativity as being sort of that lightning strike, right? Like that lightning only strikes once or very rarely. But in my experience, creativity is a process that takes very deliberate sort of dedication. You have to actually work at it. That there's like, and show up every day. That's kind of what this is kind of talking about. Even if you don't feel inspired, right? Even if you don't feel inspired, you still have to show up and do something, even if that something is not your best work or whatever that is, because all of that, even the mistakes or the mess ups or whatever it is, like the days where you feel not at all inspired, that is also when there's something to learn there, is what this is talking about. Anyways, with this Ace of Inspiration, I feel like as well, because it's kind of like this card, sorry, not the Inspiration, Ace of Voices, because I always talk about this as like always like looking in the wrong direction, which is sort of emphasizing that is like sometimes you are not facing the right way, right? Sometimes you don't feel if not inspired, it's like sometimes you have to look at the opposite or look behind or look at the past maybe, in order to gain clarity, is what this card is talking about. And I feel like you are doing that. What's coming out next here, you have the Coagulation card, which I'm seeing is really positive, because it's talking about all of that stability and reliability, right? Things are taking form, right? That's what this card talks about in a very physical way, right? Because it's all talking about like stability and earth. Which is really interesting, because I also feel like here with these cards, so these three cards specifically are coming out next. The Eight of Inspiration, and I keep saying inspiration, the Eight of Materials and the Page of Materials and the Names card came out together in the Pick a Card reading I did a couple days ago in group 3. So if you're interested, I'll also link that above if you haven't watched it. I'm not going to go into the whole story of what that is, because it took forever and I don't want to re-explain it. But what this is talking to me about, especially with the names here, because I feel like this is talking about it's related to the androgen, which is saying that I feel like the names being part of our identity, right? Like it's a very significant part of our identity and who we are and how we appear or engage with other people in the world. And I feel like there's something here about letting that go, right? There's a, with the androgen, it said something about like forgetting our names, right? Forgetting some aspect of our identity, especially things like our gender, right? Who we are, that kind of thing. I feel, which is really interesting, because I feel like there's something here where I feel like you are changing form, Capricorn, is what this is talking about. There's something, I feel like you, in whatever this process is, right? Perhaps part of your breakthrough is that perhaps there's been too much of an adherence to a certain identity of yours, maybe, or some aspect of your identity. And that's shifting, because with this Eight of Materials, if you've heard me talk about this card before, it talks about like somebody perhaps changing form, and that new form is at first a little bit scary. That's what this card is talking about. But I want to say with this sort of pink flower, so I feel like it's like, because this is always like sort of morphing into another form is what this is talking about today, right? Letting go or releasing or growing past perhaps some aspect of your identity that you became used to or comfortable in, but because of this work that you've been doing, because of this luck, right? This shift, this wheel of fortune, this turn of the wheel, it's like some aspect of your identity is shifting along with that, is kind of how this is feeling. And I feel like here, because these two cards are coming out, the dreams and the fissures, just so interesting. I had such a strange dream experience last night, which I'm not going to get into in this reading, but it's kind of talking about that there may be some sort of like really deep subconscious kind of revelation perhaps that you're having that's allowing this sort of harvest energy to come in, right? It's some sort of really significant shift in, I don't know, it just feels like with the fissures, I just see this as like like something exploding, but it's like light. What's coming out of this sort of explosion is just light, right? It's especially being emphasized with this, the Five of Voices, which to me kind of talks about like a distraction, right? Or it's like not, perhaps feeling like well, that's interesting. It's actually shifting today, because normally I see this as a distraction, but it's kind of feeling like there was something being presented to you, but perhaps you were not before, in a past encounter, there was something that was not wanting to be looked at, is kind of how this is feeling. But I feel like here with the Muse of Voices, it's like you've gotten past that challenge. You've gone past some sort of challenge of the mind, maybe, right? Like your thought processes or your patterns, or like perhaps some aspect of your subconscious that you've now broken through because you were willing to look at because you were willing to look at the spider, right? The thing that was uncomfortable, the thing that was I don't know, it's just uncomfortable, or perhaps there was something scary about it, or whatever it is. But because you were willing to look at that, it's like the Magician, all of this new energy, this like creativity is being unlocked, is kind of how this is feeling. But it's so interesting, because it's kind of feeling like this page of inspiration, which I was saying that this is sort of like the showing up every day kind of thing. It's like this is the new, perhaps more solid or more reliable connection, because this page of inspiration feels more like a inspiration strikes when it strikes, right? Like it's kind of more of a chance thing, but this feels much more like a steady connection, or a steady reliability, or more of like a solid, with these like orbs here, right? A solid creation being actually created or grasped. Okay, Capricorn, I'm going to leave the message there. We're going to move to the extended and talk about what else you may need to know about the situation. If you're interested in that, you can find the link in the description box. You'll also find a link to my website if you're interested in a personal reading. Also, all the decks that I'm using are linked below. If this message resonated with you, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.